My name is Harrison Conway, and my project is titled Associations Between Childhood Bullying and Adult Income, Longitudinal Evidence from a Representative U.S. Sample. Bullying is common among school-aged children around the world, with 1/3 of children internationally reporting being bullied. In the U.S., about 20% of students aged 12 and older reported being bullied in 2017. Many researchers believe that bullying in the U.S. is underreported. One U.S. study showed that almost 65% of students who are bullied don't report it. Bullying is defined as behaviors that are intentional, negative, repetitive, and the result of a power imbalance. Bullying's impact can be short or long-term, but little is known about the influence of bullying on adult income in the U.S. Only 2 studies have been published on the relationship between childhood bullying and adult income. Both of those studies were from Great Britain, and they both found an association between having been bullied and reduced income. However, no studies of bullying and income have looked at a U.S. population. To fill this gap, the objective of this study was to assess the relationship between childhood bullying and young adult income in a representative U.S. cohort. A longitudinal panel study was designed to address the research question. Data came from the Panel Study of Income Dynamics, or PSID. The PSID is a nationally representative study and the longest-running panel study in the United States, with data collected every other year. The Child Development Study, or CDS, is a sub-study of children in PSID households. The CDS collected information on the same children in 1997, 2002-3, and 2007-8. When these children turned 18, they were moved out of the CDS and into the PSID. This study's population was made up of CDS participants who were between 5 and 9 years old in the CDS-1. This group was chosen because they were young enough to provide answers to the CDS bullying questions, but they were old enough to report their income at age 25 in the PSID. When the inclusion criteria were applied, the total sample size was 525 participants. When the probability weights provided in the PSID dataset were applied, this study's cohort was 9,136 participants. 5 bullying exposures were available in the CDS. 4 of them, left out of activities, picked on you, taken your things, and hit you, were given in terms of their frequency in the past month. Taken together, they created the 5th exposure of interest, called the peer bullying scale. In terms of the outcome, PSID participants were asked in each wave several questions about different sources of income. The PSID then summed these responses into a labor income variable, which was the study's outcome of interest. Because the PSID doesn't collect data every year, this study's outcome was expanded to be income at age 25 plus or minus 1 year. Several demographic, childhood, and adulthood variables were considered for inclusion in the multivariate models. Univariate analyses were used to describe the exposure outcome in all other covariates. Then bivariate analyses were performed to assess the relationships between the exposures and covariates and the outcome in covariates. Lastly, multiple linear regression was used to determine the relationship between the exposure and the outcome adjusted for covariates. All statistical models accounted for the repeated measures of the data, the influence of the sampling unit, and sampling weights provided by the PSID. Early in the modeling process, gender was identified as an important confounder, and all models were stratified by gender. At study baseline, participants were about 11 years old on average, and just over half of participants were female. Participants were predominantly white and non-Hispanic in terms of being bullied at least once in the past month. About 26% reported being left out of things, about 49% reported being picked on, almost 9% reported having their things taken, and about 12% reported having been hit. At study end, mean income differed statistically by gender, with males reporting an average income of almost $8,000 more than females. Both the stratified unadjusted and stratified adjusted analyses showed significant differences in the relationship between bullying and income between males and females. In the interest of time, though, only the multivariate analyses will be discussed in detail in this presentation. In the stratified multivariate analyses, only being left out and having your things taken in the CDS-2 were associated with adult income when adjusted for covariates. None of the CDS-3 exposures were significant in the multivariate models. Let's start with the exposure of being left out of activities in the past month. For females, reporting the exposure at least 2 to 3 days per week was associated with decreased adult income compared to those who were not left out of activities. Among males, reporting the exposure 2 to 3 days per week was associated with decreased income, but no other relationships were seen. Higher levels of education were significantly associated with increased income among both males and females. For males, increased age at baseline and having lived in an unsafe neighborhood as a child were also associated with decreased income. For females, occupation type was associated with income levels. Now, let's look at the exposure of having your things taken in the past month. Compared to males who did not have their things taken, those who did at least once a week had an inconsistent pattern in terms of whether income was increased or decreased. Among females, having your things taken about once per week was associated with a decrease in income, but several exposure categories couldn't be calculated due to no responses. Once again, we see relationships between education and income for both males and females, and age at baseline and living in an unsafe neighborhood and decreased income in males, and occupation and income in females. This study's findings should be viewed with regards to its limitations. Some of the covariates were reported by parents rather than by participants. There were also some overlap in the age in participants in the CDS-2 and CDS-3. Also, bullying is a sensitive subject, and some participants may have been underreporting their experiences. Despite its limitations, this study advances our knowledge of bullying by identifying relationships between certain types of bullying and reduced income in early adulthood. It does this by demonstrating different risks and outcomes for males and females. This study also suggests that the age at which participants were bullied matters in terms of the association with later income. Almost half of this study's participants reported some form of bullying in the last month, which is much higher than the 20% estimate of bullying in the U.S. Overall, these findings suggest that programs to address bullying should differ by gender, with programs for females targeting less aggressive forms of bullying than those for males. Future research could focus on better understanding these gender differences or on creating these types of programs. Thank you for your time today.